I'm Grace Holloway, a freelance graphic designer. My life took an unexpected turn when I met and married Mark Sullivan, the youngest son of a powerful political family. His parents, master networkers, subtly twisted social interactions and conversations to isolate me from potential allies and friends, making me feel increasingly alone in my new life. This insidious manipulation began to chip away at my confidence, leaving me questioning my perceptions. I quietly exposed their manipulative tactics to key figures in their own network, setting in motion a chain of events that led to their surprising social decline and isolation. If you've ever felt trapped in a web of manipulation, hit that like button and subscribe to follow my journey. Because sometimes, the quietest resistance speaks the loudest, and what happens next might just surprise you. My life as a freelance graphic designer had always been about clarity, precision, and the stark beauty of honest lines. I thrived on bringing visions to life, creating visual narratives that resonated with authenticity. My days were a satisfying rhythm of client briefs, design software, and the quiet hum of creativity. I loved the control I had over my work, the way a chaotic concept could be distilled into something elegant and impactful. I was, by nature, an observer, someone who noticed the subtle shifts in color, the unspoken nuances in a brief, the way seemingly disparate elements could be woven into a cohesive whole. Little did I know, these very traits would become my shield and my weapon in a battle I never anticipated fighting. Then, Mark Sullivan walked into my world, and suddenly my palette exploded into a vibrant, almost overwhelming array of emotions. He was charming, attentive, and incredibly kind, a man who saw me, truly saw me, beyond the quiet artist sketching in her studio. Our courtship was a whirlwind of romantic gestures and shared laughter that felt lifted from a fairy tale. He'd bring me coffee at my studio, remember the smallest details of my day, and listen with genuine interest as I spoke about my passion for design. He made me feel seen, cherished, and utterly secure. Mark was the youngest son of Senator Eleanor Sullivan, a formidable political figure with a national profile, and her equally influential husband, Mr. Arthur Sullivan, a titan in corporate law. Their world was one of meticulously orchestrated public appearances, carefully chosen words, and a network of contacts that spanned the city's elite, touching every pillar of power and influence. It was a universe away from my own upbringing in a family of academics and artists, where intellectual honesty and quiet integrity were prized above social standing or material wealth. My parents had instilled in me a deep value for independent thought and authentic expression, qualities I cherished above all else. When I first met Mark's parents, they were everything I expected of powerful public figures: gracious, articulate, and undeniably charismatic. Senator Sullivan, with her impeccably tailored suits, silver hair styled into an elegant bob, and piercing, intelligent eyes, exuded an aura of calm authority that commanded respect without demanding it. Mr. Sullivan, a shrewd businessman with an easy, practiced smile, complimented her perfectly, his warmth a carefully managed counterpoint to her sharp intellect. Their family home, a sprawling estate nestled discreetly behind towering hedges in the most exclusive part of the city, felt less like a personal residence and more like a carefully curated museum of success. Every piece of art, every antique, seemed chosen not just for beauty, but for its historical significance and its subtle message of enduring legacy. During those initial introductions, their compliments flowed smoothly, almost too smoothly, like polished river stones. "Grace, dear, Mark has told us so much about your unique profession," Senator Sullivan had purred, her voice a silken ribbon of condescension that somehow managed to make graphic designer sound like a quaint hobby rather than a demanding career path that required skill and talent. She paused, her gaze lingering on my hands as if searching for paint stains. "So much creativity. We simply adore creativity, don't we, Arthur?" Mr. Sullivan had chimed in, nodding with an almost practiced sincerity, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. I brushed it off, attributing it to their unfamiliarity with a world outside their rarefied political and business spheres. Perhaps they genuinely didn't understand the complexities of modern creative industries. Mark, always quick to defend me, would interject, his voice earnest. "Mom, Grace's work is incredibly impactful. She designed the entire branding for the city's recent arts festival, the one Mayor Thompson praised." But his mother would simply offer that tight, knowing smile, a subtle curve of her lips that implied she understood far more than he ever could, a secret dimension of understanding that was beyond my grasp, beyond Mark's, confined only to her. It was a smile that always made me feel like an amusing, slightly naive child. As the wedding planning began, the subtle chill in their otherwise warm reception became more apparent, a persistent draft under the closed doors of their seemingly perfect family. Senator Sullivan was, naturally, involved in every detail, her organizational prowess a force of nature. From the sprawling guest list, which included every influential name in their extensive Rolodex, to the intricate floral arrangements and the exact shade of ivory for the tablecloths, which she insisted truly reflected the gravitas of a Sullivan wedding. Her presence was all-encompassing. I found myself increasingly sidelined, my opinions gently but firmly redirected, my suggestions met with a polite, yet absolute finality. "Grace, darling, of course your input is valuable, but for such a significant event, we must defer to the traditions that have served our family so well for generations," she'd explain, her tone benevolent yet unyielding, as if citing an ancient, unbreakable law. It was never a direct conflict, never an open argument, she never raised her voice. It was a constant, subtle chipping away at my agency, leaving me feeling less like a contributing partner and more like an ornament, a carefully selected accessory to the Sullivan brand. Mark, bless his heart, tried to mediate, but his efforts often felt like a child caught between two powerful, unyielding adults. "Mom, Grace really wanted the peonies for the centerpieces," he'd say, almost apologetically, to which his mother would respond, her voice laced with mock surprise, "And she shall have them, dear, in moderation, of course. Elegance, after all, lies in restraint." Her words were always impeccably polite, impeccably reasonable, making my desires seem petulant or unrefined. His sister, Clara, a flawlessly composed lawyer who moved through their social circles with the same ease as her mother, would often offer a soft, "Mother truly knows best," Mark. "She has such an eye for these things." His brother, Stephen, a shrewd financier, would simply nod in silent agreement, his gaze distant, as if already assessing the financial implications of my perceived stubbornness. It was a united front, a fortress of subtle disapproval that made me question my own judgment at every turn. The real shift, however, began after we moved into the stunning, albeit somewhat austere, townhouse Mark's parents had gifted us upon our marriage. It was a magnificent property, undeniably, but it felt less like a home and more like an extension of their estate, a perfectly appointed annex where their influence continued to permeate every room. Senator Sullivan's unannounced visits became more frequent, always timed to coincide with my attempts to personalize our space, to infuse it with my own artistic touch, my own sense of comfort. I'd be in the middle of hanging a vibrant piece of contemporary art, a stark contrast to the muted tones of the existing decor, when her elegant car would pull into the driveway. She'd sweep in, perfectly coiffed, her eyes missing nothing. "Grace, dear, are you quite sure about that painting above the fireplace? It rather clashes with the historical integrity of the mantelpiece," she'd remark, her voice laced with a concern that felt more like judgment. Then, without waiting for a response, she would glide into the kitchen, subtly rearranging my neatly organized spice rack or commenting on the informality of my chosen dinnerware, replacing it with the heavy, ornate china she had insisted on buying for us. It was as if she was constantly correcting my aesthetic, my choices, my very presence in their home. Mark's responses to my frustrations, which I carefully voiced late at night, became increasingly dismissive. "She's just trying to help, Grace. Mom has impeccable taste. It's a gift." His usual warmth would be replaced by a faint irritation, a mirroring of his mother's underlying impatience. It was as if a subtle breeze had begun to blow through our home, chilling the warmth of our new marriage and whispering doubts into my ear about my own taste, my own suitability, my own place. The initial chill soon evolved into an insidious campaign of psychological manipulation, orchestrated with such precision that I often questioned my own perceptions. Senator Sullivan, a master of public relations and nuanced communication, applied her formidable skills to my private life, weaving a web of subtle hints and leading questions that gradually eroded Mark's trust in me, and more terrifyingly, my trust in myself. It began with seemingly innocent remarks, often delivered with a tone of deep concern designed to appear benevolent. "Grace, dear, you seem a little distracted lately. Is everything all right? You've missed quite a few social invitations recently, haven't you? She'd ask Mark, in my presence, her gaze fixed on him, not me, knowing full well I hadn't missed any, or that the missed invitations were ones she had subtly failed to forward to me in the first place. I'd try to interject to correct her, to explain that I hadn't received the invitation or that I had explicitly confirmed my attendance, but she would wave a dismissive hand, a gesture of polite dismissal. Oh, don't worry, darling, it's quite understandable. We all have our moments of confusion. Mark, instead of defending me, would often look at me with a questioning glance, his brow furrowed, as if validating her observation, as if searching my face for the confusion she had just planted. These were never outright lies, but artful distortions of reality, meticulously crafted to plant seeds of doubt. She'd orchestrate situations that made me look forgetful or unreliable. Once, she insisted I confirm a dinner reservation with her directly, triple-checking the time and date. I even wrote it down, only for me to arrive at the elegant downtown restaurant at precisely the agreed-upon time to find she had subtly changed it, making me an hour late, the table already given away. Oh, Grace, how dreadful! I distinctly recall telling you 7 o'clock. Perhaps you're simply a little overwhelmed with all the new responsibilities of marriage and homemaking? She'd say, her voice dripping with false sympathy, while Mark looked on, his brow still furrowed, a faint disappointment now etched in his features. The worst part was the way she'd turn to Mark, her hand gently resting on his arm, and say, "Your wife seems a bit fragile today. Or, perhaps Grace needs a bit more rest. She seems to be forgetting things." Mark, who had once celebrated my independence and sharp mind, now began to echo his mother's sentiments with alarming frequency. He'd casually remark, "Mom just worries about you, Grace. She thinks you need to toughen up." Or, "Are you sure you remembered to lock the door? Mom said you might have forgotten it this morning when you left for your studio." The weight of these constant, subtle accusations began to press down on me, making me second-guess every memory, every decision, every instinct. It was like living in a constant state of mild concussion, my thoughts hazy, my reality warped. The isolation was another key tactic in her arsenal, wielded with a social grace that made it almost imperceptible to outsiders. Senator Sullivan, a social dynamo, carefully managed our social calendar. Our evenings were filled with high-profile events attended exclusively by Mark's family and their sprawling network of political allies, business magnates, and societal figures, leaving virtually no room for my own friends. When I tentatively suggested inviting my college friends for a relaxed dinner at our townhouse, she'd respond with, "Oh, but darling, surely they wouldn't feel comfortable in such a formal setting. And we have so many important engagements already this month. Perhaps another time, when things are less hectic." The implication was clear. My friends were not up to the Sullivan standard, and their presence would disrupt the carefully curated social fabric she had woven. She made sure I was always surrounded by her people, absorbed into her narrative, where every conversation subtly reinforced her authority and Mark's dependence on her. My attempts to connect with Mark's siblings, his sister Clara and brother Stephen, were met with polite but firm distance. Clara, a flawlessly composed lawyer who moved through their social circles with the same ease and practiced charm as her mother, would always nod in subtle agreement with Senator Sullivan's assessments, reinforcing the idea that I was somehow different or out of place. Stephen, a shrewd financier, would offer hollow pleasantries but never engage in genuine, personal conversation, his eyes distant, as if already assessing the financial implications of my perceived awkwardness. I felt like I was living in a gilded cage, observed and judged by every member of the Sullivan clan, all subtly feeding into the narrative that I was somehow unstable or ill-equipped for their glittering, yet suffocating, world. Mark's transformation was the most painful aspect, a slow, agonizing erosion of the man I had married. The man who had once championed my unique spirit and artistic mind slowly became an extension of his mother's will. He stopped defending me, stopped listening to my anxieties, and started seeing me through their distorted lens, a lens clouded by his mother's whispers. Our intimate conversations dwindled, replaced by discussions about family obligations and my supposed shortcomings. When I tried to articulate my feelings of being undermined, to explain the subtle manipulations that left me reeling, he would calmly dismiss them, often using the very phrases his mother had used. "You're overreacting, Grace. "Mom just cares about us. You're being too sensitive." His unwavering belief in his mother's benevolence, coupled with his growing impatience with my irrationality, left me feeling utterly alone and bewildered. The silence in our home, once a comforting space for creativity and shared dreams, now felt heavy with unspoken accusations and the chilling presence of a psychological battle I was losing. I knew, deep down, that something was profoundly wrong, but her psychological warfare had been so effective that I couldn't articulate it, even to myself, without immediately doubting my own mind. I was trapped in a chilling, silent battle for my own reality, and I was losing ground with every passing day. The incident that finally shattered my fragile sense of reality, pushing me to the precipice of desperation, occurred at the annual Governor's Ball, a glittering cornerstone of the political elite's social calendar. It was an event of immense importance to the Sullivans, a night for networking and cementing their influence. Senator Sullivan, with her usual impeccable planning, had insisted I wear a specific, rather ornate gown she had personally selected, a silk creation in a shade of emerald that felt utterly foreign to my personal style, but which she declared was perfect for your complexion, darling, truly. Before the event, she had casually mentioned, her voice light and precise, "Grace dear, the invitation stated an arrival time of 7:30 for VIPs. Punctuality is paramount, you know, especially with the governor giving his remarks." I had dutifully noted it, even setting an alarm. However, upon our arrival at precisely 7:30, the grand ballroom was already bustling with hundreds of elegantly dressed guests, the air thick with the murmur of conversations, and the governor was midway through his opening remarks from the podium. Mark's parents, who had arrived earlier and were already seated at their prominent table near the stage, gave us pointed, disappointed looks, their smiles tight. Senator Sullivan, excusing herself from a conversation with a prominent judge, approached us, her smile strained. "Oh, Grace, you're late? The invitation clearly stated 6:30 for VIPs. How terribly unfortunate for the governor to begin without you. Mark, dear, you must have misinformed her." Mark looked genuinely flustered, turning to me with a bewildered expression. "Grace, I thought I was sure Mom said 7:30. But his mother cut him off with a gentle, yet firm, pat on his arm. "It's quite all right, dear. Grace simply has a bit of trouble with details sometimes. We understand." The humiliation was scalding. My cheeks burned as I felt the silent judgment of the room, the subtle glances of the guests who recognized the Sullivans' public disappointment. It wasn't just the lateness. It was the implication of incompetence, of my unsuitability for their meticulously ordered world. Later that evening, Senator Sullivan would pull me aside, her voice a low, sympathetic murmur, almost too quiet to be heard over the orchestral music, yet piercingly clear. "Grace, darling, I worry about you. Sometimes you seem to just drift off. Are you sleeping well? Perhaps you need a little something to help you focus." It was a direct suggestion of mental instability, wrapped in a guise of benevolent concern. Mark, overhearing, echoed her sentiment with a heavy sigh. "Mom's right, Grace. You have been a bit scattered lately. Are you feeling okay?" His gaze was not one of loving concern, but of cautious scrutiny, as if he too believed I was losing my grip on reality. That night, lying in bed beside a sleeping Mark, the weight of their relentless manipulation crushed me. Every misremembered detail, every whispered insinuation, every instance of Mark's growing distance, it all crashed over me like a tidal wave. I felt like I was drowning in a fog of self-doubt, my own memories betraying me. Had I truly become so forgetful? Was I, Grace Holloway, known for my meticulous attention to detail, actually losing my mind? Tears streamed silently down my face, wetting my pillow. The exhaustion was bone-deep, not just from lack of sleep, but from the constant mental gymnastics of questioning my own reality. I felt utterly hollowed out, a ghost in my own life. But then, amidst the despair, a flicker of something new ignited within me, a tiny ember of defiance. A sharp, clear thought pierced through the haze of confusion. This isn't me. This isn't right. The systematic nature of their concerns, the way Senator Sullivan so subtly orchestrated every perceived flaw, the immediate validation from Mark, it was too precise, too perfect to be accidental. It was a pattern. The quiet defiance, the stubborn resilience that had always been a part of me, stirred. If my mind was being attacked, then I needed to defend it. And the only way to prove what was happening was to capture it, to make the invisible visible, to bring light into the shadows. I thought about my graphic design work. The meticulous layering, the unseen grids, the subtle shifts in color that could alter an entire perception. It was all about control, about shaping a narrative. Their manipulation was a form of psychological design, twisting my reality. I needed to become a designer of truth, to expose their hidden framework, to reveal the underlying structure of their deceit. The thought was whispered, almost unheard, but it was there. I would record them. I would capture their words, their tones, their insidious tactics. It felt alien, clandestine, and deeply unsettling, a profound violation of trust, but it was the only path forward, the only way to reclaim my own sanity. I spent days researching discrete recording devices, not for any work project, but for my very survival, for the truth. I explored tiny voice-activated recorders, microphones, anything that could be hidden in plain sight, blending seamlessly into the background of our impeccably decorated home. It was a desperate measure, born from a desperate need to reclaim my own mind. The resolve hardened within me, cold and precise, like a perfect vector line. I would become the silent observer, the meticulous archivist of their deceit. And then, I would make them face the truth. The next few weeks became a clandestine operation, a silent war waged within the elegant confines of my own home. I ordered a tiny, high-quality voice-activated recorder online, disguised as a sleek, unassuming USB drive, something that could easily pass as my work tool. My heart pounded with a mix of fear and grim determination as I set it up for the first time, hiding it among the decorative items on the living room mantelpiece, then later in a flower vase in the dining room, or tucked within the folds of a throw blanket on the sofa. Every time Senator Sullivan arrived for an unannounced visit, or when she joined us for dinner, I would activate it, my movements casual, my expression serene, as if nothing out of the ordinary was taking place. The act of recording felt profoundly violating, a betrayal of the trust that should exist within a family, yet it was utterly necessary. It was like standing outside my own life, observing the intricate dance of manipulation I had been caught in, no longer just a victim, but a meticulous documentarian. Listening to the recordings later, alone in my studio after Mark had gone to bed, was agonizing. It was like re-experiencing every subtle jab, every condescending remark, every gaslighting comment, but this time with irrefutable proof. I heard Senator Sullivan's voice, calm and measured, twisting words and memories with practiced ease. "Grace, darling, surely you remember our conversation about the charity auction. You confirmed you'd handle the seating chart, didn't you?" "I'm quite certain you did." Then my own hesitant reply, almost lost in the recording, I didn't quite recall that, Senator. I thought you said your assistant would handle it." And then her triumphant, almost pitying sigh, a sound I had come to dread. "Oh, Grace. Your memory seems to be playing tricks on you again. Mark, dear, perhaps we should look into those vitamins I mentioned. For memory recall." Mark's voice, hesitant at first, then firming with a tone of concern that now felt chilling. "Mom's right, Grace. You really do seem to be forgetting things lately." The casual cruelty of it, the systematic chipping away at my self-confidence, was laid bare. It wasn't just my imagination. It was a deliberate strategy, a carefully orchestrated performance. The recordings also captured the gradual transformation in Mark, the man I loved. In earlier conversations, I could hear a faint discomfort in his voice when his mother made these remarks, a slight hesitation before he echoed her. He seemed to genuinely struggle with the dissonance, trying to reconcile his mother's words with the woman he knew. But as the weeks turned into months, his voice became more confident, his agreement more immediate, his own words mirroring his mother's criticisms. He had truly started to believe his mother's narrative about me, buying into the fabricated reality she spun. "Grace, Mom was asking if you had trouble focusing today. You seemed a bit spacey at dinner, darling." Or, "My mother thinks you're taking too many risks with your freelance work. She worries about your stability, your ability to handle a family life." He wasn't actively malicious, but a loyal son slowly but surely conditioned to prioritize his mother's judgment over my reality, over his own observations. The sound of his voice, once a source of comfort, now carried the sting of his unwitting betrayal. It was a chilling testament to the power of relentless, subtle manipulation, and how easily even loving bonds could be twisted. I began categorizing the recordings, meticulously noting dates, times, and the specific manipulative tactics employed. Gaslighting, projection, subtle devaluations, strategic isolation, and character assassination disguised as concern. It was like building a psychological case file, piece by agonizing piece. Each recorded interaction was a puzzle piece, and as they fit together, a devastatingly clear picture emerged. This wasn't accidental oversight or genuine concern. It was a calculated, deliberate campaign to undermine me, to diminish my role in Mark's life, and to establish Senator Sullivan as the ultimate, unquestionable authority. The senator's public image was one of unwavering integrity, compassionate leadership, and a commitment to truth. The recordings revealed a different woman entirely, a strategist, a puppet master, pulling strings with a velvet glove. The irony was almost unbearable. The truth, raw and undeniable, was now contained in a tiny digital file. And for the first time in months, I felt a resurgence of my own strength, the quiet resolve of someone who finally had irrefutable proof. The crushing burden of self-doubt lifted, replaced by a fierce, protective certainty. I knew what I had to do. The decision to confront Mark was not made lightly. I agonized over it for days, the weight of the recordings pressing down on me, the fear of his reaction a knot in my stomach. How could I make him see what had been happening, when his mother's influence had been so pervasive, so insidious? I knew that simply playing the recordings wouldn't be enough. He would deny, rationalize, or accuse me of being manipulative myself, turning her own tactics against me. I needed to create a moment, an undeniable experience that would force him to confront the reality of his mother's actions and his own unwitting complicity. I chose a quiet evening, when we were both home, settled in after dinner, the air thick with the unspoken tension that had become our constant companion. I began calmly, my voice steady, despite the tremor in my hands. "Mark," I started, my voice barely above a whisper, "we need to talk about something that's been happening, something serious that affects both of us and me most deeply." He sighed, a weary sound, almost dismissive. "Grace, if this is about Mom again, can we just drop it? She means well, you know how she is, she's just protective." "No," I said, my voice firm, cutting through his pre-programmed defense. "It's not about meaning well, Mark. It's about truth, and I have something I need you to hear, something that will change everything." I pulled out the small USB drive, the innocuous object that held months of their private conversations, the key to my stolen sanity. His brow furrowed with confusion, then a flicker of irritation. "What is that?" he asked, a hint of accusation already in his tone. I inserted it into the small, portable speaker I had brought discreetly into the living room, and then, with a deep breath that steadied my trembling hand, I pressed play. The first few minutes were innocuous, a typical family dinner, the clinking of cutlery, polite chatter. But then, Senator Sullivan's voice filled the room, calm and clear, recounting a fabricated incident. "Mark, dear, Grace does seem to have a knack for misplacing things, doesn't she? Remember those important documents for your client meeting last week? She was convinced they were stolen, but they were right on the kitchen counter all along." Then, Mark's own voice followed, hesitant at first, then firming with that familiar echo of concern. "Yes, Mom. She does tend to be a bit forgetful sometimes." As the recordings continued, featuring conversation after conversation where his mother subtly undermined my capabilities, questioned my sanity, and systematically turned him against me, Mark's face transformed. His initial confusion gave way to bewilderment, then a dawning horror. He listened to his mother's calm, manipulative tone, heard his own words echoing her subtle accusations, and saw the chilling pattern of their deception unfold before his very ears. There were moments when he flinched, when he closed his eyes, when he finally looked at me with a profound sense of shock and shame, a silent question in his eyes. How could I have been so blind? "No," he whispered, his voice hoarse, a desperate plea. "No, she wouldn't, she couldn't. That's not Mom." But the voices in the room, his mother's and his own, were undeniable, irrefutable. When the recordings finally ended, a profound silence hung heavy in the air, broken only by Mark's ragged breathing and the frantic pounding of my own heart. He looked at me, his eyes wide with a pain that mirrored my own, but also with a dawning, terrible understanding. The truth had finally broken through. He stumbled over his words, a torrent of apologies mixed with desperate disbelief, his handsome face contorted with guilt. Grace, I can't believe this. I didn't see it. How could I have been so blind, so stupid? The guilt was palpable, radiating off him in waves. I explained the systematic nature of the gaslighting, how it had chipped away at my self-trust, how I had genuinely begun to question my own sanity, to believe their fabricated reality. He hung his head, overwhelmed by the revelation, his shoulders slumping. She always said she was protecting me, protecting our family, protecting you, he mumbled, his voice choked with emotion. I always trusted her judgment. She's my mother. The betrayal wasn't just his mother's. It was his unwitting complicity, his failure to truly see me, to trust me over his own parent, to defend me against such insidious attacks. In that moment, the raw, undeniable truth of his mother's manipulation laid bare not just her cruelty, but also the fundamental weakness in our own connection. Our marriage, built on his family's approval rather than true, unvarnished equality, was irrevocably broken. I knew then that I could not stay. The path ahead, though daunting, was clear. I had to reclaim my life and expose the truth about the woman who wielded influence through deceit. Leaving Mark was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. The initial shock gave way to a wave of calculated defiance, a cold, clear resolve that settled deep within me. Senator Sullivan, true to form, immediately launched a quiet, strategic campaign to control the narrative of our separation. Her inner circle, the tight-knit network of influential figures who had always deferred to her wisdom, were informed that I was struggling with some personal issues, experiencing a period of emotional fragility, and that the separation was a mutual, regrettable decision due to irreconcilable differences, primarily my emotional instability. She attempted to paint me as the troubled party, ensuring sympathy remained firmly on their side, protecting her pristine public image. But I had my own plan, a strategy as subtle and layered as one of my complex graphic design projects, designed to expose her manipulation without directly confronting her or making myself the central, emotional figure in the scandal. My revenge wouldn't be a scream, but a whisper that would grow into an undeniable roar. I knew that a direct, public accusation from me, an unverified emotional wife, would simply be dismissed as the irrational rantings of an unstable individual. My leverage wasn't in personal confrontation, but in the irrefutable authenticity of the recordings themselves and the power of an independent, credible voice. I needed to find someone who could amplify that truth, someone detached and respected in the public sphere. My target was Evelyn Reed, a seasoned investigative journalist known for her incisive exposés, her unwavering commitment to unearthing hidden truths, and her reputation for meticulous fact-checking. I reached out to her discreetly, using a secure, anonymous email address and a burner phone, providing just enough tantalizing information, anonymized snippets of the recordings, carefully selected quotes that revealed the dissonance between Senator Sullivan's public persona and her private actions, to pique her interest without revealing my identity. I framed it not as a personal grievance, but as a pattern of manipulative and potentially damaging behavior by a prominent public figure that warranted serious scrutiny. Evelyn, initially cautious, was undeniably intrigued. The stark contrast between Senator Sullivan's widely celebrated public image of integrity and empathetic leadership, and the chilling, subtle manipulation evident in the snippets I provided was too compelling to ignore. It was a story that transcended personal drama and touched on issues of public trust and character. I became her anonymous source, a ghost in the background, carefully feeding her more excerpts, guiding her to observe specific interactions at public events, and providing nuanced insights into the senator's network and inner workings. I made sure to emphasize that this was about exposing a dangerous form of psychological control, a pattern that could potentially affect others in her sphere, not just a personal marital dispute. I meticulously curated the material, choosing instances that clearly demonstrated the senator's gaslighting tactics, her attempts to isolate me, and her subtle slandering of my character. My goal was not to destroy her reputation for personal gratification, but to unveil the truth about who she truly was behind the carefully constructed facade she presented to the world. The risk was immense. If I was discovered, I could be branded as vindictive, manipulative myself, further solidifying their narrative of my instability. But the alternative, remaining silent, letting their insidious manipulation define my reality and perhaps affect future victims was far worse. I worked methodically, like an artist painstakingly layering colors and textures to reveal a deeper, truer image. Evelyn, with her sharp journalistic instincts, began her own independent verification, observing the senator's public interactions, conducting discreet interviews with former aides and associates, without revealing my connection, and noticing the subtle inconsistencies I had highlighted. She was painstakingly piecing together the larger puzzle, seeing the pattern of calculated charm masking a ruthless drive for control. The silence from my end was intentional. I wanted the truth to emerge on its own terms, through the objective lens of meticulous journalism, not as a subjective outpouring of personal grievance. The stage was set not for a direct confrontation, but for a slow, inexorable revelation. The groundwork was laid, not for a battle of words, but for an unveiling orchestrated by the quiet architect of my own liberation. The article hit like a carefully aimed lightning bolt, published on a Friday afternoon, just as the political week was winding down, ensuring maximum impact over the weekend and allowing the story to percolate. The headline, crafted by Evelyn Reed with surgical precision, was deceptively simple, devoid of sensationalism. The persona and the private voice, unpacking the rhetoric of a public servant. It made no direct accusations of infidelity or financial malfeasance, but rather presented a chilling, analytical expose of Senator Eleanor Sullivan's communication patterns, contrasting her public image of empathetic leadership with a series of anonymized, yet unmistakably familiar, private dialogues. The article didn't explicitly state the source, referring only to extensive audio recordings and first-hand accounts from a close family source, speaking on condition of anonymity, fearing professional and personal reprisal. Yet, the nuances, the specific phrases, the insidious patterns of gaslighting and psychological manipulation were undeniably those I had documented with such painstaking detail. Evelyn had done her work brilliantly, focusing on the insidious nature of the abuse rather than sensationalizing a personal drama. The immediate aftermath was a maelstrom. Senator Sullivan's office initially issued a terse, dismissive statement, condemning the article as baseless and politically motivated slander, a desperate attempt to discredit a dedicated public servant. But the article included direct quotes from the recording's chilling snippets of the senator's voice calmly telling someone, "You're simply remembering things incorrectly, dear. You must be mistaken. Or perhaps you're feeling a bit overwhelmed. This is a lot for some people to handle, you know." These phrases, when juxtaposed with her public speeches on integrity, transparency, and empathy, created a stark and unsettling contrast that resonated deeply with the public. Public reaction was swift and fierce. Online comment sections erupted with shared experiences of subtle manipulation, people recognizing the insidious tactics described, validating my own tormented journey. The anonymity of the source only added to the mystery, fueling speculation, and keeping the focus squarely on the senator's character and the alarming discrepancy between her public and private selves. News channels picked up the story, dissecting the psychological implications of the manipulative language used, analyzing her every public gesture for signs of the persona described in the article. The Sullivans' attempts to discredit the recordings were futile. Evelyn, with my careful guidance, had ensured the excerpts she used were beyond reproach, authenticated by multiple audio experts who confirmed their untouched nature and the absence of any editing. The fact that the article did not sensationalize or exploit the personal details of my marriage, choosing instead to focus on the broader pattern of manipulative behavior, made it all the more credible and difficult to dismiss. It was a clinical, analytical exposé of a public figure's private persona, and the discrepancy was damning. The family source remained elusive, a ghost in the machine, amplifying the chilling effect and preventing direct retaliation against me. Senator Sullivan, accustomed to controlling every narrative, found herself in the unaccustomed position of having no narrative to control, her words turned against her. Her carefully crafted public image, built over decades, began to fracture under the weight of her own recorded words. Her appearances became strained, her public speeches hesitant, and her once unwavering supporters began to express quiet doubts, whispers turning into open questions. The very whispers she had once used to isolate me now echoed back at her, amplified by the relentless hum of public scrutiny. Mark, caught in the eye of the storm, was devastated. His initial loyalty to his mother crumbled as the undeniable truth, now publicly scrutinized and debated, became inescapable. He saw his mother's true nature reflected in the damning light of public opinion, and he saw his own blind complicity, his willingness to be swayed. The revelation, once confined to our private confrontation, now played out on every news channel, every social media feed, a constant, public reminder of his family's dark secret. The Sullivans, once the epitome of social influence and political power, found their network slowly, subtly shifting. Invitations to exclusive events grew scarce, polite smiles became strained and fleeting, and conversations seemed to die whenever they entered a room, replaced by an uncomfortable silence. The very social dynamics Senator Sullivan had so masterfully controlled to isolate me now turned against her, a cruel, ironic twist of fate. Their social decline was not a dramatic fall, but a gradual, chilling withdrawal of affection and influence, a direct consequence of the quiet truth that had finally been revealed. The threads of their meticulously woven social tapestry began to fray, leaving them increasingly isolated within the very circles they had once commanded. In the months following the article's publication, I watched from a quiet distance as the Sullivans' world, once seemingly impregnable, slowly began to unravel. Senator Sullivan's political career, once a juggernaut of influence and unwavering public support, faltered. Public trust, built on her carefully constructed image of integrity, eroded with each news cycle that re-examined the insidious nature of her private conduct. While no direct charges were filed, the court of public opinion delivered its own verdict, a silent but powerful condemnation. She resigned from several prominent board positions, citing personal reasons and a desire to focus on family, and her once unassailable influence in political and social circles waned dramatically. Mr. Sullivan, always the quiet enabler, also retreated from the public eye, his practiced charm no longer enough to deflect the uncomfortable questions that now followed their name. Their social isolation was profound, not a dramatic exile with public shunning, but a chilling realization that their carefully cultivated network, built on power and image, had quietly, almost imperceptibly, turned its back, leaving them adrift in a sea of polite avoidance. My own journey was one of profound healing and quiet reclamation. I moved into a sun-filled apartment, filled with my own art and a palpable sense of peace that I hadn't realized I had lost. The heavy fog of self-doubt that had clouded my mind for so long lifted completely, replaced by a clarity and certainty I hadn't known since before Mark. I reconnected with my old friends, nurturing relationships built on genuine trust and mutual respect, something I now valued above all else. My freelance graphic design career flourished, no longer constrained by the need for external validation or the fear of being deemed too much. Each project I undertook felt like an act of creative liberation, an affirmation of my own authentic vision. I learned to trust my instincts implicitly, to recognize the subtle cues of manipulation before they could take root. It was a profound lesson in self-preservation and the importance of holding onto one's truth, even when it feels like the entire world and the people closest to you are telling you otherwise. Mark, burdened by the fallout and his own profound remorse, eventually sought therapy. He reached out to me months later, his voice raw with regret, a shadow of the charming man I had married. "Grace, I'm so sorry," he had whispered over the phone, his voice choked with emotion. "I was blind. I let her do that to you. I was so caught up in her narrative and what she wanted me to believe." I listened, feeling a pang of sorrow for the man he had been and the man he might have been, but the wound was too deep to bridge. Our paths had diverged too fundamentally. "I hope you find your own path, Mark," I replied, my voice calm and steady, devoid of anger or bitterness, only a quiet understanding. "And I hope you find the strength to stand on your own, to truly see for yourself." Our conversation was brief, a polite closure to a chapter that had taught me so much. I wished him well, truly, but my life, my path, was no longer intertwined with his or his family's. Today, a year and a half after the truth was unveiled, I am more myself than I have ever been. The experience taught me that strength isn't always a roaring defiance, but often a quiet, persistent whisper of truth in the face of overwhelming deceit. The hidden recordings, meant only to clarify my own sanity, became the unexpected catalyst for a public reckoning. The very social network Senator Sullivan had used to isolate me ultimately turned away from her, a karmic consequence of her own manipulative tactics. I learned that true power lies not in controlling others, but in reclaiming one's own narrative and trusting one's inner voice. And that sometimes, the most profound victories are won not with grand gestures, but with the quiet courage of seeking and revealing truth, even when it's uncomfortable. I am still Grace Holloway, living a life defined by my own terms, my own integrity, and the unwavering belief in the power of an authentic voice. Have you ever experienced similar situations or feelings of quiet doubt that turned into a profound revelation? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this story touched something in you, make sure to subscribe and share it with someone who needs to be reminded that the truth always finds its way out, and your worth is not defined by anyone else's distorted reality. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that courage isn't always a roar. Sometimes it's the quiet voice at the end of the day saying, "I'll try again tomorrow."